Hi, nerds. Happy Monday. Sorry I can't be there with you today to help you work through your processing. But do know that I will be giving you feedback when you submit your final IA plan on Friday. Also, remember that this is a working document and it will change again and again and again. So, whatever you submit on Friday doesn't have to be what you exactly say in your IA. You might add, you might take away, you might adjust as we move through revisions, and that's totally fine. So, at the very least, make sure you've filled in everything by Friday so that I can give you really specific focused feedback on areas where your analysis might be lacking. Okay. So at this point, hopefully you have all 4 lines of your author technique analysis completed. If you don't, do not move forward until you've completed all 4 of those analysis rows, right? So if we look down here, we're talking about the 2 intentional element rows that are under each of your texts. So there's my first one, and here is my second one, okay? Now notice, these aren't necessarily perfect. There's some things I might need to add or change, and that's okay. At least I've got it in there. At this point, you shouldn't or probably don't have numbers in your sequence boxes yet, or you possibly don't have words in your final column here, or you still need to possibly put in your transitions. If you've been doing those things as you go, fantastic. Today you might just go return back to those things and see how you could make those a little bit better. Once you have analyzed both of the intentional elements in both of your texts, then you're going to move into your context, right? And make sure that you have good context of your actual issue, identifying, illustrating how it's an issue, and then kind of zooming in on what specific aspect of that issue you want to evaluate. And then make sure you get into having a strong thesis, right? And you can just copy, change mine. Take the same structure, same words, and then replace the content with your text and your elements in your analysis, okay? So make sure also that you have both texts titled here. Remember, one of those texts has to be a work that was originally written in another language, then later translated. The second test has to be an English text, all right? Global issue goes up here. Then you'll move into your context boxes for each text. Remember, big goal here, what does your reader need or listener need to understand in order to get your analysis, in order for all to make sense and be cohesive? You want to assume that whoever's listening has never read this book. They should be able to understand your analysis, and it should make sense to them whether or not they've read the book, right? So you might need to provide a little synopsis of what's happening in that moment. There might need to be something that you mentioned that happened earlier. You might talk about the tone or the mood of the moment in the set. You might look at, an interesting way in which the author begins this conversation or this explanation of the issue. You need to decide what that context is, but make sure you provide it for both of your texts. Context is all about showing the knowledge and understanding of the text in which you're reading. All right. Once you get your context in there, then you might move on to completing your conclusion. Okay, a conclusion, just like in writing, when we deliver good expression, essentially what we do for our listener or reader is we tell them what we're going to tell them, and then we tell them all the things and prove it, and then in the end we tell them what we just told them. So essentially your conclusion is going to be a restatement of your thesis, but in a new and fresh way. So don't just simply use the same old words you've always used for the ones used at the beginning, right? You want to slightly change that. Try to make the same statement with new words. Additionally, in your conclusion, it's very helpful if you can try to take your issue to the next level. Ideally, throughout your analysis, you're kind of hinting at a bigger meaning, a bigger understanding. And then by the end, you should be able to boom, hit them with that bigger so what, right? Why is this important to consider? Why is this important to look at? Why should people read these 2 authors? And how can these authors better help us understand the impact of the issue and how it might affect our cultures, our communities, ourselves, and what we should understand about that. Try to take it to that big level at the end, okay? Once you have all of your rows filled in, then you want to go back and do those finishing touches, okay? This would be number 1, identifying the sequence of your analysis. So you have 2 options, right? You can do a block structure. So my example that you've already listened to was just that, where I spoke about my first text for 5 minutes, well, roughly about four or so, and then I spoke about my second text. So I treated them separately, one and then the other. The second way you can organize your analysis is by doing what we would call like a weave technique, right? So I might address the first text, talk about its context, then the second text and its context, then I bring in the first author technique from the first text, and then I'd move to the first author technique from the second text, and so on and so forth, so that your argument becomes this sort of weave, okay? What you're seeing on my example here is a weave. As you notice, the first thing I say is this, my context and my thesis. Then the second thing I move into is my context for text 1, right? And I explain that 40-line set. Then I move into my context for text 2. See, that's where my number 3 is. And then from there, I go into my first intentional element for text 1. Now notice I picked this second intentional element first, mainly because I felt like this intentional element, the references to light, was a much better analysis, much stronger. So I kind of want to end talking about that one to really build my argument and make it get traction over the course of the 10 minutes, okay? So then I'll talk about that intentional element for number 4. And then the fifth thing I'm going to talk about is my first intentional element for text 2. Then I go back to my second intentional element for text 1. And then I finally return to my last intentional element for text 2. And then after that, I conclude. So you can see this box here, this column, tells me exactly where I'm going to place my reference notes on my bullet list, right? So when I go to create my bullet list, I'm going to then effectively start with my number 1, and then I'll put in number 2, and then I'll skip down to 3 and back up to 4, and so on and so forth, so that my bullet list is organized exactly the way in which I'm going to say it all. That's the idea of the sequencing. Okay, so the next thing you might look at is your high-level vocabulary. This is your last column of your row. So this is where you want to go in and find some really juicy, descriptive synonyms that really speak specifically to what that character might be feeling, going through, experiencing. This is also a great place to pull from your global issue matrix. The first box you did on that issue research was language of the discipline, right? Words we use to talk about this topic. That's a great spot to pull some of these high-level vocabulary words that you could place here. I recommend having 2 high-level vocabulary words per row. You can have more if you want. The more you have, the smarter you'll sound. It's completely up to you. The last thing you'll want to take a look at is your transitions. You will go to these gray boxes in between. And so depending on what your order and sequence is going to be, that's going to determine what that next transition might be. For example, I start by talking about this, and then I move into this. To begin, Hear the Wind Sing is a short story that details a relationship between a man and a woman. So I have this to begin, and then I kind of lead into what I'm about to talk about, right? And then I would move into talking about the context of text 2. From there, I might look at saying concurrently, Murakami incorporates many indirect metaphors. So concurrently meaning this is differently, or no, at the same time, in the same way, they both use a metaphor. And so you just got to make sure that whatever transition you're placing in matches with the thing that's coming next, right? Whatever idea you decided to sequence next. This might be a little confusing. So for now, if you just need to have placeholder transitions there until you build your bullet list and it's easier to see where those transitions might fall, that's okay. All right. So that should take you to the end of your actual plan. From there, if you get to that place and you're ready to move forward, you're going to practice. You're going to run through this thing a couple times in your head, out loud, in front of your stuffed animals, in front of a mirror, whatever feels good. And then you're going to kind of sort out in those couple of practices, do I have everything I need here? Is there something that's not quite making sense? And then I want you to actually record yourself. So by block day, we will be recording ourselves for sure. If you get to recording yourself before block day, you're a badass and you're fantastic. So if you can get there, please try. It's just going to make you even more ready for future assessment. Okay. We've got a couple of helpful things in the room today for you. At your buckets, I've got these question sheets from the cue cards that we were using for our research. Sometimes these questions can kind of help you find a good line of analysis within your topic or whatever technique you're looking at. So feel free to kind of take a look at these and see if they can assist you at all. The last thing that's going to be really helpful to you is the transition flip charts. These are organized by like what you're actually saying. So if you know that you're going to be opposing something, you go to the opposition one and it will give you a bunch of examples. Key thing to remember is you don't want to sound repetitive, right? We don't want to use the same words over and over again. So try to switch up your transitions. Use new ones that you've never tried before. Use a couple that you're completely used to, but make sure you're varying your sentences, varying your word choice, and varying the different types of transition and like active verbs that you use. Okay. Once we get this guy recorded, we will do some little evaluations of each other, and then we'll move through a week of revisions where we will look at each specific criteria on the rubric and figure out, hey, how can we make this aspect of our IA even better to ensure that we reach that passing score? All right, so that's what you're doing today, trying to make it through this plan and getting as close to finished as possible. You will be turning this guy in on Friday. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, but remember, rely on each other. You guys are a lot smarter than you give yourself credit for. I won't be there tomorrow, but you will see another video from me tomorrow, and then I will see your lovely faces on block day. I hope you have a lovely week.